My name is Garrett, a 58-year-old retired construction foreman from Portland. After 30 years of working with heavy machinery, I gradually lost my hearing. Recently, I participated in an experimental treatment that unexpectedly restored most of it. But I kept this miracle secret when I noticed how my daughter Alice acted around me. Then one day, while pretending to still be deaf, I overheard her talking to her husband. What she said when she thought I couldn't hear shattered my heart completely. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how betrayal led to my unexpected healing. I grew up believing in the American dream. Work hard, build something meaningful, provide for your family. These weren't just ideals, they were my daily reality. For over 30 years, I poured concrete-framed houses and eventually managed crews as a construction foreman throughout the Pacific Northwest. My hands tell the story of that work, calloused and weathered with a crooked index finger from an accident in '92. I started with nothing but determination. My father walked out when I was 12, leaving my mother to raise 3 boys on a waitress salary. I dropped out of high school at 16 to help support the family, picking up odd construction jobs. What I lacked in formal education, I made up for in work ethic. By 25, I had my contractor license and was taking on small renovation projects. By 30, I had my own crew. It was never easy, but there was dignity in the struggle. When I met Laura at a friend's barbecue in '87, I was already established enough to think about starting a family. She was a kindergarten teacher, with a laugh that could light up a room. We married within a year, bought a modest 3-bedroom house in Portland, and our daughter Alice arrived in '90. Those early years were a blur of diapers, dawn to dusk work days, and the deepest contentment I had ever known. I remember holding baby Alice in my arms after a 14-hour workday, my muscles aching, but my heart so full it felt like it might burst. Laura would take a photo of us every year on the front porch of our home, tracking how Alice grew taller as the house behind us improved with each renovation I squeezed in on weekends. New siding one year, an expanded kitchen the next, a finished basement when Alice turned 10. Every callus, every sunburn, every aching joint at the end of the day was worth it, because I was building more than houses. I was building a future for Alice. When she showed academic promise in high school, Laura and I made a pact our daughter would never have to drop out like I did. She would go to college no matter what sacrifices we had to make. The first signs of my hearing problems started when I was around 45. Years of operating jackhammers, table saws, and heavy equipment had taken their toll. At first, it was just asking people to repeat themselves occasionally. Then, it was turning the TV volume louder than Laura preferred. I brushed it off as just part of getting older. My doctor recommended hearing aids, but pride got in the way. In my mind, those were for elderly people, not a working man still in his prime. Laura would leave reminder notes about appointments with audiologists that I would conveniently forget. In retrospect, that stubborn pride cost me precious years of clear communication with the people I loved most. Laura never got to see Alice graduate college. Pancreatic cancer took her quickly in 2013, just as Alice was finishing her sophomore year. The loss devastated us both, but in some ways it brought Alice and me closer initially. She would come home weekends from university, and we would sit on the porch swing Laura had loved, sometimes talking about her mother, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. By then, my hearing loss had progressed significantly. I finally relented and got hearing aids, but they only helped so much. High-pitched sounds became impossible to distinguish. Following conversations in noisy environments became an exercise in frustration. Still, Alice and I managed. She would sit on my right side where my hearing remained stronger. She would text me details when phone conversations became too difficult. Things changed after Alice graduated and started her career in marketing. She met Stephen, a financial analyst, and they married 3 years later. That was when I first noticed the shift in our relationship. Her visits became less frequent, phone calls shorter. When they did visit, I would catch expressions of impatience crossing her face when she had to repeat herself. Stephen rarely engaged me directly, always seeming uncomfortable or distracted. When their twins Jacob and Emma were born 5 years ago, I thought it might bring us closer again. I adored those children from the first moment I held them. But visits with the grandchildren were always short and strangely formal. The kids seemed coached on how to behave around me, speaking unnaturally loud and slow. I would catch Alice sighing when she thought I wasn't looking. By last year, my hearing had deteriorated to the point where traditional hearing aids were nearly useless. Conversations became exhausting puzzles with missing pieces. I started avoiding social situations altogether. Even my weekly coffee with my old construction buddy Frank became a strained exercise in repeated phrases and misunderstandings. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. My doctor told me about an experimental treatment being tested at Oregon Health Sciences University. They were looking for veterans and industrial workers with noise-induced hearing loss. The procedure involved stem cell therapy that might regenerate damaged hair cells in the inner ear. Insurance wouldn't cover it, but I had savings from selling my business 5 years earlier. I applied with zero expectations. Medical miracles happened to other people, not stubborn old construction workers. But I was accepted into the program, and in January of this year I underwent the procedure. The doctors warned me that results, if any, would likely be modest and might take months to manifest. 3 weeks after the treatment, I woke up to the sound of rain pattering against my bedroom window. Not the dull, muffled suggestion of sound I had grown accustomed to, but the clear, distinct rhythm of individual droplets. I lay there for almost an hour, just listening, tears streaming down my face. Later that day, I could hear the mail carrier's footsteps on my front walk, the click of my neighbor's dog's nails on the sidewalk, even birds singing in the oak tree outside. At my follow-up appointment, my audiologist was astonished. I had regained nearly 85% of my hearing function. She called it remarkable, unprecedented even. I sat in her office making plans to share the news with Alice, imagining her joy and relief. I pictured actual conversations with my grandchildren, no more nodding and pretending to understand. The thought filled me with more happiness than I had felt since before Laura died. Leaving the hospital after receiving my miraculous test results, I was floating on air. The doctor had explained that my case was exceptional. Most patients saw improvements of 20 to 30% at best. For me to regain 85% of my hearing was nothing short of miraculous. I found myself noticing sounds I had forgotten existed. The soft rustle of my jacket, as I walked, the distinct pitch of different car engines in the parking lot, even the subtle electronic hum of the hospital's automatic doors. I sat in my truck for a long moment, savoring these rediscovered sensations before starting the engine. My first instinct was to call Alice immediately. I imagined her excitement, the relief in her voice, perhaps even tears of joy. We could have real conversations again. I could hear my grandchildren's voices, clearly listen to their school stories, truly be present in their lives, instead of smiling and nodding through a fog of muffled sounds. As I reached for my phone, a conversation outside my window caught my attention. 2 nurses were taking a break, leaning against the wall near the parking lot. I could hear them perfectly. Another small miracle. "How is Mr. Reynolds doing with his new implant?" one asked. "It's sad, actually," the other replied. "The device works great, but his family treats him completely differently now that he can hear. His daughter used to visit daily when he was deaf. Now that he can hear, she barely comes by once a week. It's like she only valued the relationship when she felt sorry for him. That's awful. Some people only want relationships on their terms, I guess. Their words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I sat frozen key halfway to the ignition. A question formed in my mind that I couldn't shake. Would Alice be genuinely happy about my recovery, or would she just have one less reason to feign concern? The seed of doubt took root immediately. Over the past few years, I had caught glimpses of what might be Alice's true feelings. The eye-rolling when she thought I wasn't looking. The whispered conversations with Stephen in the kitchen. The way she checked her watch repeatedly during our brief visits. Had she been performing the role of dutiful daughter while secretly resenting every minute spent with her deaf old father? The question haunted me during the drive home. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a plan had begun to form. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed to know the truth. What if I didn't tell Alice about my restored hearing? What if I continued to act as though the treatment had minimal effects? I could get special hearing aids that supposedly helped slightly, but still required her to speak loudly and clearly. I would finally hear what happened when people thought I couldn't. The moral implications troubled me deeply. Laura would have disapproved of such deception, especially with our daughter. But Laura had never seen how Alice's expression shifted from affection to annoyance the moment she thought I couldn't see her face. Laura hadn't witnessed the increasing brevity of our visits, the thinly veiled impatience. That night, I made my decision. I called Alice and told her the treatment had shown only minimal improvement. I could hear slightly better with new specialized hearing aids, I explained, but would still need her to speak up and face me directly. She expressed appropriate disappointment, saying all the right things about not giving up hope for further treatments. But was there a note of something else in her voice, relief perhaps? The following weekend brought Alice's monthly visit with Stephen and the twins. I had my new hearing aids prominently displayed, but kept my secret locked away. As they entered my home, I watched their behaviors with new awareness. "Hi, Dad," Alice said loudly and slowly giving me a brief hug. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, sweetheart," I replied, matching her volume but noting how unnecessary it was. I could hear her perfectly, even when she turned away to mutter something to Stephen. Throughout lunch, I maintained the charade. I asked them to repeat things occasionally. I positioned myself to see their lips moving. I kept the TV volume uncomfortably high. All the while, I caught every whisper, every aside, every sigh of frustration. Stephen barely engaged, spending most of his time on his phone. The twins, now 5 years old, stayed glued to their tablets, except when prompted by Alice to go give Grandpa a hug. Their reluctance was palpable, and the forced nature of these interactions broke my heart anew. When Alice asked about my finances, specifically whether I had considered selling the house since it was so much to maintain for one person, I pretended not to hear her clearly the first time. She repeated the question louder, a flash of irritation crossing her face before she composed herself. I deflected with vague assurances that I was managing fine. As they prepared to leave after barely 2 hours, Alice reminded me that they would be super busy for the next few weeks, but would try to visit again soon. The twins gave mechanical hugs on command. Stephen offered a distracted handshake. And just like that, they were gone, leaving behind the lingering question of whether my experiment was confirming my fears or creating them. Over the next 2 visits, the pattern continued. I gathered more evidence with each interaction. Alice's phone calls became even shorter often, with background noises suggesting she was multitasking rather than focusing on our conversation. When I mentioned missing Laura as her birthday approached, Alice quickly changed the subject to something more convenient. When I asked about attending Jacob and Emma's preschool graduation, I was told it would be too loud and overwhelming for me. My suspicions grew, but I needed definitive proof before confronting the situation. That proof would come during their next visit, in a way more painful than I could have imagined. Alice and her family arrived for their monthly obligation visit on a Sunday afternoon in April. The weather had turned unexpectedly warm, a perfect Portland spring day that would normally lift spirits, but the atmosphere in my house felt strained from the moment they crossed the threshold. "Dad, we brought some pasta salad," Alice announced loudly, handing me a small container from the grocery store deli counter. Not homemade, not my favorite, just a token offering that required minimal effort. "Thank you, sweetheart," I replied, accepting it with a smile. How thoughtful. I had prepared a proper meal despite their protests that they couldn't stay long. Pot roast with potatoes and carrots, the same meal Alice had loved as a child. The aroma filled the house, a sensory memory of happier times. Stephen barely looked up from his phone as he entered, offering a distracted, "Hey, Garrett," without making eye contact. The twins, now kindergartners, trudged in with expressions that suggested they were fulfilling a chore rather than visiting their grandfather. "Jacob, Emma, come give your grandpa a hug," Alice instructed mechanically. They approached reluctantly, giving the quickest embraces physically possible before retreating to the couch and immediately pulling out tablets from their backpacks. "Kids, remember what we talked about? 20 minutes of screen time, then spending time with Grandpa," Alice said, though her tone lacked conviction. She checked her watch within 5 minutes of arriving. Throughout dinner, conversation was stilted. I asked about the children's school, about Alice's work, about their plans for summer. Each question received the briefest possible answer before the subject changed or silence fell. Stephen checked his watch repeatedly. The children picked at their food, clearly having been told they could have something different later. "This is delicious, Dad," Alice said with practiced politeness, though she had barely touched her plate. "You really shouldn't go to so much trouble for us, though. We could just order pizza next time." After dinner, as I began clearing plates, Alice offered to help. "Stephen, why don't you take the kids into the living room? Dad and I will clean up." Stephen herded the children out without protest, relief evident in his posture. In the kitchen, Alice mechanically rinsed plates while I loaded the dishwasher. When her phone rang, she glanced at it and said, "Dad, I need to take this. Work stuff. I'll just be a minute." She stepped out onto the back porch, closing the door behind her. With my restored hearing, I could follow her conversation perfectly through the window. It wasn't work at all. She was talking to someone about a vacation home rental for summer. "We can only do the last 2 weeks of July," she said. "No, my father's situation is under control. We visit once a month, that's plenty." When she returned, I pretended not to have heard anything unusual. We finished the kitchen cleanup in silence. I suggested we join the others in the living room for dessert and coffee. In the living room, Stephen was scrolling through his phone while the twins remained absorbed in their tablets. No one was talking. No one was connecting. This was family in proximity, only not in spirit. "I made apple pie," I announced. "Laura's recipe. And I have ice cream for the kids." "That sounds great, Dad," Alice replied automatically. "But maybe just small pieces. We had a big lunch earlier." I went to the kitchen to serve dessert, leaving the door slightly ajar. What happened next would confirm my worst fears. As soon as I was out of sight, I heard Stephen's voice, no longer muted by pretense. "How much longer do we need to stay? The Andersons invited us over for drinks at 6. "Another hour at least," Alice replied, her voice completely different than the one she used with me. Gone was the exaggerated patience replaced by irritation. I can't do this much longer. Dad's condition is such a burden. We're wasting our Sunday sitting here watching him shuffle around. Well, the hearing treatment was a bust, Stephen said. At least we don't have to worry about him catching on to our plans. I know, thank God. Did you see this place? It's falling apart. He can barely take care of himself, let alone this house. We need to talk to him about assisted living soon. I found a place in Vancouver that's reasonable. Not too expensive, not too close. Not too close sounds perfect, Stephen laughed. When do you think we should bring up him signing the house over to us before he moves? The market in this neighborhood is hot right now. Once we get him to agree to the facility, the social worker said it's better to do it all at once. Less chance for him to change his mind. We can suggest it's for estate planning purposes to avoid taxes. Smart. And with the house proceeds plus his savings, we could finally get that cabin at the lake. He'll never use that money anyway. Exactly. He's just sitting on it. And it's not like he has much quality of life left. Did you see how the twins avoid him? They're scared of having to shout all the time. My hands began to shake so badly that I had to set down the pie I was cutting. Each word felt like a physical blow. 30 years of sacrifices for Alice, working 60-hour weeks to pay for her dance lessons, her braces, her college education without a single student loan. All those late nights when I would come home with my back-aching hands bleeding from work, only to help her with school projects. The second job I took when Laura got sick to make sure there would always be enough. And now I was nothing but an inconvenience to be managed. A resource to be extracted. A problem to be solved by warehousing me in some facility while they enjoyed the fruits of my lifetime of labor. The twins' voices drifted in next. Mom, can we go soon? Grandpa's house smells weird. I know, sweetie. Just a little longer. Remember what we practiced? Tell Grandpa you like his house and ask him about his tools. He'll talk forever about boring stuff, but just nod and smile. And then we get ice cream after, right, the real kind, not the cheap stuff Grandpa has. Yes, and if you tell him you want to see his workshop, extra sprinkles. Is Grandpa rich? Mom Tommy at school said old people are rich, and when they die, you get all their stuff. There was a pause, then Alice's voice lower now. Grandpa worked very hard his whole life, so yes, he has money saved. And someday when he goes to heaven to be with Grandma, we'll make sure his house and his money help our family. That's what grandparents want. So all this will be ours someday, even the ugly chairs. Stephen laughed. You can throw those out first thing, buddy. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the pie-forgotten ice cream melting in its container. Physical pain bloomed in my chest, as if something essential had ruptured. Images flashed through my mind, Alice as a toddler reaching for me as I came home from work, teaching her to ride a bike, proudly watching her graduate high school, walking her down the aisle at her wedding. Had it all been an illusion? Had she always seen me as nothing more than a provider, an ATM with a heartbeat? Or had something changed when Laura died, when my hearing began to fail? Had I somehow failed as a father without realizing it? I wanted to storm into the living room and confront them, to demand explanations for their cruelty, to ask how they could teach innocent children such calculating selfishness. But something stopped me. If I revealed what I had heard, I would lose my one advantage knowledge of their true intentions. Instead, I took several deep breaths, arranged dessert on a tray, and returned to the living room with a smile fixed firmly on my face. As I distributed slices of pie, I studied my daughter's face. This stranger who shared my blood, but apparently none of my values. "This looks great, Dad," she said loudly, that artificial patience back in her voice. "You really outdid yourself." I nodded, unable to trust my voice just yet. The rest of their visit passed in a blur of false smiles and small talk. When they finally prepared to leave an hour later, Alice gave me her customary quick hug. "We'll see you next month, Dad. Take care of yourself, okay? Call if you need anything." I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak without revealing everything. As their car pulled away, I stood in my doorway waving, maintaining the charade until they were out of sight. Then I closed the door, sank to the floor with my back against it, and wept for the first time since Laura's funeral. The family I thought I had was gone. Perhaps it had never existed at all. The next 3 days passed in a fog of betrayal and disbelief. I moved through my house like a ghost, touching photographs of Alice growing up, remembering each moment captured, and wondering if anything had ever been real. Sleep came in brief, troubled bursts. Food lost its taste. The world that had been freshly reawakened by my returned hearing now seemed too harsh, too loud, with painful truths. On the first morning, I sat on my bed staring at the wall for nearly 2 hours, replaying every word I had overheard. The casual cruelty, the naked greed, the way they were teaching my grandchildren to view me as nothing more than a future inheritance. My mind scrambled for alternative explanations for ways I might have misunderstood or misheard. But my restored hearing had been crystal clear. There was no ambiguity in their words. By afternoon, that initial shock had hardened into something sharper. Rage built slowly in my chest, a burning sensation that spread until my hands shook with it. I found myself standing in my garage looking at the tools I had used to build their first home, the custom furniture in their dining room, the treehouse in their backyard. I had created so much with these hands, given so much. For what to be discarded like a broken appliance, I imagined scenarios of confrontation, showing up unannounced at their house, revealing my hearing recovery in front of their friends, making a scene at the next family gathering. The fantasy of their embarrassment, their stammered excuses brought momentary satisfaction that quickly faded into deeper hurt. On the second day, doubt crept in. Had I somehow earned this treatment? Had I been a demanding father, an inadequate provider? I spent hours mentally cataloging my parenting. Yes, I had worked long hours when Alice was young, but I never missed a school play, a parent-teacher conference, a birthday. When Laura got sick, I had managed to be both breadwinner and caretaker, making sure Alice could stay focused on college rather than coming home. After Laura died, I had given Alice space to grieve while remaining available whenever she needed me. No, I concluded as evening fell on that second day. I had not been a perfect father. No one is. But I had loved my daughter unconditionally. I had sacrificed willingly for her future. I had respected her adult choices, even when I disagreed with them. I had never been the burden she now considered me to be. By the third morning, something shifted. I woke before dawn and made coffee, then sat on my back porch watching the sun rise. A clarity began to emerge from the emotional chaos. This was not about me failing as a father. This was about choices Alice had made as an adult. Choices about values, about what kind of person she wanted to be. I couldn't change her. I couldn't make her appreciate sacrifices she clearly took for granted. I couldn't force her to be the daughter I thought I had raised. But I could choose how to respond. I could choose to act with dignity rather than desperation. I called Frank, my oldest friend from my construction days, and asked if he could meet for coffee. At the small diner where we had shared countless early breakfasts before job sites, I told him everything. The hearing recovery, the deception, what I had overheard. Frank listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You know," he finally said, I lost my son to drugs 15 years ago. Not to death, though sometimes that might have been easier, but to addiction. He stole from me, lied to me, disappeared for years at a time. But I would give anything at all for another chance with him. I started to protest that it wasn't the same situation, but Frank held up his hand. I am not saying you should just forgive and forget. Hell no. What they're planning is elder abuse, pure and simple. But I am saying that whatever you decide to do, leave a door open. Not for them, for you. Don't let their betrayal turn your heart to stone. After coffee with Frank, I drove to the cemetery where Laura was buried. I hadn't visited in months. The silent conversations had seemed pointless with my hearing loss. Now I sat on the bench beside her grave and spoke aloud for the first time in years. I wish you were here, I told her. You always saw people more clearly than I did. You would have noticed this happening before it went so far. I imagined what she might say, her practical wisdom that always cut through my more emotional reactions. She would be heartbroken about Alice, but she would also remind me that responding with pure anger would only deepen the wound. That evening, I made 3 decisions. First, I would protect myself legally and financially. The next morning, I called an elder law attorney recommended by one of my former employees. I scheduled an appointment without telling Alice. If she and Stephen were planning to manipulate me into signing over assets, they would find that impossible. Second, I would reclaim my independence and joy. My hearing had returned, a gift I had never expected to receive. I would not allow Alice's betrayal to overshadow this miracle. I began researching volunteer opportunities, focusing on veterans groups where my construction skills might be useful. I called old friends I had lost touch with during my years of isolation. Third, I would confront Alice and Stephen, not in anger, but with dignity and clarity. I would not allow them to rewrite our family narrative or manipulate me into a future I did not choose. But I would prepare carefully before that confrontation. The breakthrough moment came nearly a week after overhearing their conversation. I was sorting through old photographs for a potential move when I found a picture of myself holding newborn Alice. The joy on my face was unmistakable, pure love without expectation of return. It struck me then I had done my job as a father. I had given her a foundation of love, opportunity, and values. What she built on that foundation as an adult was her choice, not my failure. I raised her, I said aloud to my empty living room, but I can't make her a good person. That part was always up to her. With that realization, the path forward became clear. I would not be a victim in this story. I would not beg for love or respect. I would stand firmly in my own worth regardless of Alice's treatment, and I would ensure that the legacy of my life's work would go to those who truly needed it. Over the next 4 weeks, I methodically prepared for what would come next. Each morning I woke with renewed purpose, the fog of betrayal gradually lifting as I took control of my future. The hearing I had regained became not just a physical sense, but a metaphor for a new awareness of my own agency. My first step was meeting with Patricia Harmon, the elder law attorney. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had seen every variety of family manipulation. When I explained my situation, including my secret hearing recovery and what I had overheard, she nodded without judgment. "Unfortunately, this is more common than you might think," she said. "Adult children often feel entitled to their parents' assets. The good news is you've caught this early and you're of sound mind. We have many options." And together we created a comprehensive plan. First, I revised my will, removing Alice as primary beneficiary. Instead, I established a small trust for my grandchildren's education that would only activate when they turned 25, old enough to potentially develop values independent of their parents. The bulk of my estate would go to a foundation supporting veterans with service-related disabilities and workers with industrial injuries. Patricia helped me create powers of attorney for healthcare and finances that named Frank as my decision-maker rather than Alice. She filed legal paperwork that would make it difficult for anyone to claim I was incompetent without significant medical evidence. We also restructured some of my assets to protect them from potential claims. "What about the house?" I asked during our third meeting. "They're planning to convince me to sell it and move into assisted living." "That's actually not a bad idea," Patricia surprised me by saying. "But on your terms, not theirs. Selling the house gives you liquidity and freedom, just not the way they're envisioning." This led to my second area of preparation. I contacted a realtor recommended by Patricia, who specialized in helping seniors downsize. Together, we assessed my home's value in the current market and discussed timing for a potential sale. The numbers were better than I expected. Decades of Portland's growth had made my modest home quite valuable. But where would I go? The thought of an institutional assisted living facility made my stomach turn. One afternoon, while volunteering at a veterans woodworking shop, I mentioned my situation to James, a retired Marine who had become a friend. "You should check out Ocean View Commons," he suggested. "It's where my uncle moved last year. Independent living apartments with optional services, right on the coast. Community of active seniors, not a nursing home. They've got woodworking shops, fishing trips, the works." The following weekend, I drove to the coastal community James had mentioned. It was nothing like the sterile facility I had imagined Alice planning for me. Residents had their own apartments in a campus-like setting. There was a workshop better equipped than my garage, a community garden, walking paths along the ocean. People my age and older were living vibrant, independent lives while having access to services if needed. I put down a deposit that day on a 2-bedroom apartment with a view of the Pacific. The timeline worked perfectly. I could list my house in June and move by August. Alice and Stephen would have no say in the matter. Their plans for my future would never materialize. My third focus was rebuilding connections beyond my immediate family. I reconnected with former coworkers and friends who had drifted away during my years of hearing loss. I joined a twice-weekly coffee group of retired tradesmen at a local diner. I volunteered teaching basic carpentry to at-risk youth and veterans transitioning to civilian life. With each conversation, each new or renewed connection, I felt my world expanding again after years of contraction. The isolation that had defined my existence was replaced by genuine community. These people valued my presence, my skills, my stories, not what I could provide materially. Through it all, I maintained the charade with Alice. Her calls remained infrequent and brief. When she mentioned visiting again, when things settled down a bit, I merely agreed without pressing for details. I needed more time to complete my preparations before the confrontation. By late May, everything was in place. My legal protections were established. My housing transition was arranged. My social connections were strengthened. I was ready to reclaim my narrative. I called Alice on a Tuesday evening, making sure to speak slightly too loudly, as had become my habit during our calls. "Alice, I've been thinking about having a family dinner at my house next Sunday. Something special. Could you, Stephen, and the kids come over around FIP? There are some important things I'd like to discuss with you all." There was a brief pause before she responded. "Sure, Dad. Is everything okay? Do you need help with anything?" I could hear the calculation in her voice, wondering if this was the opening she had been waiting for to discuss assisted living. Everything's fine, I assured her. Just want to have my family together. I'll take care of all the food. You just bring yourselves. Okay, Dad. We'll be there. Do you want me to bring anything? Just yourselves, I repeated. This is important to me. After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen, taking in the home where Alice had grown up, where Laura and I had built our life together. Sunday would change everything. There was no going back once truth was spoken aloud. But as I ran my hand along the counter Laura had picked out 20 years ago, I felt her presence encouraging me forward. Truth had always been her North Star. I'm doing the right thing, I said to the empty room, and for the first time in weeks, I fully believed it. Sunday arrived with perfect early summer weather. Sunlight streamed through windows I had meticulously cleaned. The dining room table was set with Laura's good china unused since her passing. A pot roast, Alice's childhood favorite, simmered in the oven, filling the house with familiar aromas. Everything was prepared with deliberate care, a final act of fatherly love regardless of what would follow. I had rehearsed what I would say countless times over the past week. The words were measured factual without unnecessary cruelty, but with unflinching honesty. I would not raise my voice. I would not resort to emotional manipulation. I would simply speak my truth and outline the consequences of their choices. At precisely 5 o'clock, I heard their car pull into the driveway. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the front door before they could knock. The expressions on their faces as they approached revealed much. Alice's practiced patience, Stephen's barely concealed impatience, the twins' resignation to another boring visit with Grandpa. "Welcome," I said, using my normal speaking voice rather than the artificially loud tone I had adopted during my deception. The subtle change went unnoticed as they filed into the house. "It smells wonderful, Dad," Alice said, her voice exaggerated as always. "You didn't have to go to so much trouble." "No trouble at all," I replied calmly. "Please, everyone sit down in the living room. I have something to share before dinner." They exchanged glances, sensing something different in my demeanor. Stephen looked almost hopeful, clearly thinking this might be the opening they had been waiting for to discuss assisted living and my finances. Once everyone was seated, I remained standing. The twins fidgeted on the couch between their parents, already bored. Alice leaned forward with an expression of exaggerated interest that I now recognized as completely artificial. "I have some news to share," I began speaking in my normal voice. "The experimental hearing treatment I underwent in January was actually successful. Much more successful than I initially told you. In fact, I've been able to hear normally for the past 3 months." The change in their expressions was immediate. Alice's face froze in a mask of confusion. Stephen's eyes widened in alarm. Even the twins sensed the sudden tension looking up from their restless fidgeting. "What do you mean, Dad?" Alice asked, her voice no longer artificially loud. "You said it barely helped. You still wear hearing aids." "The hearing aids are real, but I no longer need them," I explained calmly. "I can hear perfectly well without them. I have been able to hear every word spoken in this house for the past 3 months, including conversations you thought I couldn't hear." The blood drained from Alice's face as realization dawned. Stephen shifted uncomfortably, shooting her a panicked glance. "3 weeks ago, when you were here for dinner, I overheard your conversation in the living room while I was getting dessert," I continued steadily. "I heard you discussing plans to move me into an assisted living facility in Vancouver. I heard you planning to convince me to sign over my house to you. I heard you telling the children that my possessions would be theirs someday, that they could throw out my ugly chairs. I heard you describe me as a burden, my condition as an inconvenience to your social schedule. Dad, you don't understand. Alice stammered, her composure cracking. We were just talking. It wasn't serious. We were stressed that day. You were spying on us. Stephen interjected, anger replacing his initial shock. You deliberately tricked us. I didn't plan to deceive anyone, I replied, maintaining my calm. When my hearing returned, I was overjoyed and wanted to share the news immediately. But then I overheard a conversation at the hospital about how some families treat deaf relatives differently once they can hear again. It made me wonder about our relationship, about why your visits had become so brief and tense. So yes, I kept my recovery secret to learn the truth. And I did. I turned to face Alice directly. For 30 years, I worked 60-hour weeks to provide for you. When you wanted to take dance lessons, I picked up weekend contracting jobs to pay for them. When you needed braces, I sold my boat. When you got into Northwestern, I remortgaged this house so you could graduate without student loans. When your mother got sick, I worked days and cared for her nights so you could focus on your education. I have never, not once, considered any of that a burden. It was my privilege as your father. Alice's eyes filled with tears, whether from shame or being caught, I couldn't tell. But now I know how you see me. As an inconvenience. As a resource to be managed and eventually harvested. As someone whose time has passed and who should be warehoused out of sight while you enjoy the fruits of my lifetime of labor. That's not fair, Alice protested weakly. We were concerned about your well-being. Living alone at your age isn't safe. My well-being, I repeated. Is that why you discussed which vacation property you could buy with the proceeds from my house? Is that why you've been coaching my grandchildren to perform interest in me for extra ice cream? The twins looked confused, too young to fully understand, but old enough to sense the adult tension surrounding them. Emma began to cry softly, and Jacob looked at his mother with uncertainty. I have made some decisions. I continued, reaching for a folder on the side table. First, I am selling this house. Not because you think I should, but because I have chosen a new place to live that better suits my needs and interests. I've purchased an apartment at Ocean View Commons on the coast. I move in August 1st. Stephen's face darkened. You can't just make decisions like that without consulting us. We're your family. We have your best interests at heart. My best interests? I nodded. Like the assisted living facility in Vancouver you researched, the one that's not too close, not too far, as Alice put it. No, Stephen. I am a mentally competent adult making my own choices about my future. Second, I continued, pulling out another document. I have revised my will and estate plan. Alice is no longer my primary beneficiary. I have established a modest educational trust for Jacob and Emma that will become available to them when they turn 25. The remainder of my estate will go to foundations supporting veterans and injured workers. You can't do that, Stephen blurted, his face flushing red. That's our inheritance. You're just being vindictive because you overheard one conversation. I've made new financial arrangements as well. I pressed on, ignoring his outburst. My attorney has helped me structure my assets in ways that protect them from potential claims or manipulation. Frank Davis is now my healthcare and financial power of attorney, not Alice. Alice began sobbing openly, now her carefully constructed facade completely collapsed. Dad, please. We can work this out. You're misunderstanding everything. We love you. I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her, trying to see past my hurt to the child I had raised. Was there anything of that girl left in this woman? Any trace of Laura's compassion? Any echo of the values we had tried to instill? I want to believe that's true, I said, my voice softening slightly. But love isn't just words, Alice. It's actions. It's respect. It's treating someone with dignity even when it's inconvenient. It's remembering the sacrifices made for you and honoring them, not calculating how to profit from them. What do you want from us? Stephen demanded, his tone defensive. An apology. Fine, we're sorry you overheard a private conversation. But you tricked us for months. You're not innocent here. I shook my head slowly. What I want isn't an apology. What I want is a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine care, not obligation and resentment. What I want is for my grandchildren to know me as a person, not as a future inheritance. What I want is honesty. I walked to the dining room and began bringing dishes to the table. Dinner is ready. You're welcome to stay and eat the meal I prepared, or you can leave now. Either way, these are the new terms of our relationship. I will not be manipulated. I will not be managed. I will not be made to feel like a burden for existing past my useful years as a provider. The silence stretched uncomfortably as they exchanged glances. Finally, Alice stood up, wiping her eyes. Kids, get your things, we're leaving. But Mom, I'm hungry, Jacob protested. Now, Jacob, we need to go. Stephen was already heading for the door, car keys in hand. The children reluctantly followed, confused by the adult drama swirling around them. At the door, Alice paused and turned back to me. This isn't over, Dad. You're not thinking clearly. We'll talk when you've calmed down. I smiled sadly. I've never been thinking more clearly, Alice. When you're ready for an honest relationship, you know where to find me. They left without another word. I stood in the doorway watching their car pull away, feeling a complex mixture of grief and liberation. The confrontation was over, but the consequences were just beginning. I returned to my dining room and sat alone at the table set for 5. The house felt emptier than ever, yet somehow lighter. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I was fully present in my own life, making my own choices, facing truth without flinching. I served myself a plate of pot roast, still my favorite after all these years, and ate in silence, listening to the evening birds outside my window with my miraculously restored hearing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I had spoken my truth, and that was enough. The first night after the confrontation, I slept more peacefully than I had in months. There was grief, certainly, the loss of the relationship I thought I had with my daughter, but also relief. The burden of deception had been lifted. The fear of being manipulated was gone. I had taken control of my own narrative, and that brought a profound sense of peace. The next morning, I woke to a flurry of text messages and missed calls from Alice. Some were angry, accusing me of overreacting and humiliating her family. Others were pleading, suggesting we start fresh and forget this unfortunate misunderstanding. I responded to none of them. Words had lost their meaning in our relationship. Only actions would matter going forward. Stephen left a single voicemail, his tone barely containing his fury. You have no right to cut Alice out of your will. We've been planning our future based on certain expectations. This is elder spite and we'll contest it if necessary. I saved the message as evidence of their intentions, then blocked his number. By the end of that first week, the messages from Alice shifted in tone. Dad, please talk to me. I know we hurt you. I know we got caught up in things we shouldn't have. But you're still my father. The kids miss you. I wondered if they even noticed my absence, given how little they had engaged with me during visits. I maintained my silence, focusing instead on my transition plans. The realtor listed my house, and within 3 days we had multiple offers well above asking price. I began the bittersweet process of sorting through 30 years of accumulated possessions, deciding what would come with me to my new coastal home and what would be donated or sold. Each item held memories. Laura's reading chair that had sat empty for a decade, the kitchen table where I had helped Alice with homework, the workbench in the garage where I had taught her to build her first birdhouse. There were moments when the grief would overwhelm me, and I would sit surrounded by these physical reminders of a family that no longer existed as I had believed. In those moments, I would call Frank or one of my new friends from the veterans group. They would listen without judgment, offer perspective without platitudes. Several even came over to help with the sorting and packing, turning solitary grief into shared memories and even occasional laughter. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I drove to Ocean View Commons to finalize paperwork for my new apartment. The sense of anticipation grew as I walked the grounds, imagining my new life there. The woodworking shop instructor showed me current projects residents were working on. The community garden coordinator introduced me to several future neighbors. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine sense of belonging and possibility. On the drive back to Portland, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Patricia, my attorney. Garrett, I wanted to give you a heads up. Alice and Stephen came to my office today trying to get information about your will and financial arrangements. Of course, I told them nothing without your authorization. What exactly did they want? I asked, pulling into a rest stop to focus on the conversation. They presented themselves as concerned about your mental health. They suggested your hearing recovery might have triggered some kind of paranoid episode. They asked about the process for demonstrating diminished capacity. They think they can have me declared incompetent. I said the realization both painful and unsurprising. They can try, but it won't work, Patricia assured me. You've been evaluated by multiple medical professionals during your hearing treatment. You're clearly of sound mind. This is just desperation on their part. Thank you for letting me know, I said. Is there anything I need to do? Just continue documenting everything, every interaction, every message, and don't engage without witnesses present. The call left me shaken, but more resolved than ever. The depth of their determination to control my assets rather than rebuild our relationship confirmed I had made the right decision. By late July, my house was sold, most of my possessions were packed or distributed, and my new apartment was ready. The day before the moving truck was scheduled, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Alice standing alone on the porch, her expression a mixture of defiance and desperation. "You can't even answer my calls," she demanded. "After everything I've done for you, everything you've done for me," I repeated, the irony painful. "Please come in, Alice, but I'm recording this conversation for my protection." I held up my phone to show the active recording app. Her face flushed with anger, but she stepped inside. The house was mostly empty now, just a few pieces of furniture and stacked boxes remaining. "So you're really going through with this?" she said, gesturing around. "Selling our family home, moving away from your family, punishing us all because of one overheard conversation." "This isn't punishment, Alice. This is consequence. And yes, I've sold the house I owned and am moving to a place of my choosing. What about us? What about your grandchildren? You're just abandoning your family." I looked at my daughter standing in the emptied home where I had raised her, where I had taught her to walk, to read, to ride a bike, where Laura and I had tried to teach her compassion, gratitude, integrity. Family isn't just DNA and obligation, Alice. It's mutual respect. It's genuine care. It's showing up for each other not because of what you might gain, but because of what you can give. When you're ready for that kind of relationship, my door will always be open. And what about the money, the inheritance? That's part of family too, passing down what you've built to the next generation. Her voice had an edge of entitlement that broke my heart anew. The most valuable things I have to pass down aren't in my bank account, I replied. They're the values your mother and I tried to teach you. Hard work, integrity, gratitude, respect for others, especially those who sacrificed for you. That was the real inheritance we wanted for you. She had no response to that, just stood awkwardly in the echo of the empty living room. Finally, she sighed. So this is it, you're just cutting us off. I've established educational trusts for Jacob and Emma. I want them to have opportunities just as I provided for you. But no, I will not fund vacation homes or lake cabins for adults who see me as nothing but a resource to be harvested. She left shortly after, no resolution reached, no real connection restored. As I watched her drive away for the last time from this house, I felt a sense of finality. One chapter of my life was ending. Another was about to begin. The move to Ocean View Commons marked a tangible transition. My new apartment, smaller but perfectly adequate, quickly became home. Large windows overlooked the Pacific, providing ever-changing views of tides and weather. The workshop became my second home, where I began teaching basic woodworking to other residents. Weekly fishing trips with James and other veterans gave structure to my days. Alice made one more attempt at reconciliation about 6 weeks after my move. She drove to the coast, with the twins showing up unannounced on a Saturday morning. Her approach was different this time, less confrontational, more measured. The kids wanted to see where Grandpa lives now, she explained, though Jacob and Emma looked more resigned than eager. I welcomed them in offering hot chocolate to the children and coffee to Alice. As the twins explored the apartment with mild interest, Alice and I sat on my balcony overlooking the ocean. "It is nice here," she admitted reluctantly. "Probably nicer than that place in Vancouver we were looking at." "I chose it for myself," I replied simply. "That makes all the difference." We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching gulls wheel over the water. Finally, Alice spoke again, her voice softer than I had heard it in years. "I don't know how to fix this, Dad. I know we hurt you. I know what you heard was awful. But you're still my father. I still need you in my life." For the first time, I heard something genuine in her words. Not calculation, not performance, but a glimmer of the daughter I had raised. "Need me or need what I can provide?" I asked gently. She flinched at that, but answered honestly. "Both, probably. I've been so focused on providing for my own family, on giving them what you and Mom gave me, that somewhere along the way I started seeing you as, I don't know, a resource more than a person. I'm not proud of that." "It's a start," I acknowledged. "Recognizing it is a start." "So where do we go from here?" she asked. "Slowly," I replied. "With honesty, with new boundaries. I am not an ATM or a future inheritance. I am a person with my own life to live, my own choices to make. If you can respect that, perhaps we can rebuild something authentic." She nodded, and for the first time in our conversation, met my eyes directly. "I'd like to try." That visit ended with tentative plans for another. No promises, no grand declarations, just a small step toward something new. Whether it would grow into true reconciliation remained to be seen. In the months that followed, my life expanded in ways I never could have imagined. I joined a choir, my restored hearing allowing me to enjoy music again. I took up photography, capturing the dramatic coastal landscapes. I formed deep friendships with fellow residents who shared stories of their own family complexities. Alice and the twins visited every other month. Each time the interactions became slightly more genuine. Jacob showed interest in learning woodworking. Emma and I developed a shared love of beachcombing. Alice and I had cautious but increasingly honest conversations about our past and potential future. Stephen remained distant, still bitter about the changed inheritance. I made peace with that. Not every relationship can or should be salvaged. The greatest healing came through my volunteer work with veterans experiencing hearing loss. My story, both the physical recovery and the emotional journey, resonated with many of them. Sharing my experience helped transform my pain into purpose, my betrayal into wisdom that might help others. A year after my move to Ocean View, I sat on my balcony watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My hearing captured the perfect symphony of waves crashing, gulls calling, wind in the shore pines. The miracle of sound had returned to my life, but an even greater miracle had emerged from the painful truth it revealed. I had discovered my own worth independent of others' validation. I had learned that family can be redefined, expanded, chosen. I had found that even the deepest betrayal can, with time and wisdom, lead to authentic connection rather than bitter estrangement. The hearing I regained gave me more than sound. It gave me truth, painful as it was, and truth, I discovered, is the only foundation solid enough to build a life of genuine peace. Have you ever discovered a painful truth that ultimately set you free? Has betrayal ever led to unexpected healing in your life? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear that dignity can be found even in life's most painful moments. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the hardest truths lead to the most authentic healing.